All right.
This is a part 2, completely ungraded. We just thought it was an interesting conversation, so we're just going to continue on, right?
Yeah.
And then you could probably just email it to them.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
But, I wanted to kind of contend the point that people have an inherent need for things to be meaningful. I feel, I don't know if you could tell at this point, but I'm very much a nurture over nature kind of guy.
Okay.
I think like 99% of the things about a person are all societally taught. I think that's a pretty comfortable assertion to have, from my opinion. But I really don't think that it's an innate human desire for things to have meanings. I just think that we're brought up in a world where everything has a meaning. And so we get so comfortable with that as soon as that meaning gets ripped away and it's not replaced with anything valid, because that's really not what atheists are trying to do, is replace it. They're just trying to say that God isn't real. That people start revolting because it's what they know and it's what they're comfortable with. And I think the proof of this would be all of those skeptics or existentialists or absurdists who are living perfectly happy, healthy lives, while also acknowledging that things are meaningless. I would consider myself one of those people. Like, I'm not depressed about things not having meaning. We could argue that's because I just don't think about it all the time.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that it works.
Yeah.
It works enough, and it's just something that we might need to overcome as a society. Rather than say that, well, this is impossible, so we need to manufacture something like this for society. Because I think we're trying to transition away from a meaning-based society, while the rest of the society is not caught up at all with anything we're doing.
So that's, first of all, that's a very postmodernist point that you started off with. The idea of nurture over nature gives way to the idea that there's no reality, there's only social constructions. It doesn't make sense to talk about, for example, this table in a physical sense. It only makes sense to talk about it in, as far as like social constructions. This is something that Foucault sort of touches on. And then there's...
I'm sort of... I would agree with Foucault for everything except power. I do not like power being associated with everything. I think it's valuable in some circumstances.
Yeah, he doesn't like it. He thinks it is that way, though. He becomes at first he's a communist, but then in 1968, just like all the other French intellectuals, he switched to anarchism. And he notably is just giving this image, and he's like, we're in dire straits. I'm not gonna do anything about it. We can't. I don't know if we can do anything about it. It's just how it is. But then there's this guy who defends the Enlightenment. I think he might still be around today. Habermas. He was a member of Frankfurt School, whatever. He was a Marxist. Now he's not a Marxist. He's weird.
Classic.
Yep. And he asked something to Foucault, which was basically, well, what about like the real world? Like nature is like real. And I think Foucault walked away from it saying something along the lines of, oh, Habermas fucking got me with his Enlightenment bullshit. Like, it's something that he was very famously pissed off about. So this socialization of meaning is very interesting. There is a case to be made that meaning is necessary or something like that. The issue is, though, any argument that I make with that, you can argue that, oh, you're just saying that because you're socialized into that.
Yeah. Which is something I try to stay away from.
Yeah.
It's just like it's an intellectual black hole.
Yeah.
So that's why I said 99%, because obviously there are things that are naturally hardwired into us that we are prone to do, like all the cognitive errors that we're prone to make, stuff like that. That would make us manifest in certain ways. But I feel like enough of our enough of our the way that we are today is all based off of certain intuitions or morals that are baked into us, consciously or not. Like I mentioned in class this one time that I think that if you're Christian, that has you're a lot more likely to believe in foundationalism, not because anything really connects the two of these, even though you can make the argument that the basic beliefs would come from God. I feel like if you're in a position to where you would believe in a religious world or a religious figure, you're more prone to believe in things like basic beliefs in a very intricate way. But I try to stay away from that when we're talking about things like nurture versus nature. And it seems like impossible to get to that point, but I would bet my money on that being possible. Where we could live truly in a world of pure skeptics, and it'd be possible. We could just manufacture our own morality, and people would be okay with that. But then the obvious question you could raise to me is that if all of our opinions are interconnected so heavily, that world might be fucking terrible for another reason that has nothing to do with skepticism at all, which is a possibility. But I don't know if that's an argument enough not to try.
So one thing I want to touch on here is there was a debate that was happening at university in France. I think it's called University of France or something like that, or College of France.
College of the United States.
In the 1940s, there was a philosopher named Simone de Beauvoir. Beauvoir was the wife of Sartre, and that's not to discount her in any way. Right. She, in my opinion, is smarter than Sartre. It seems like she takes the ideas of Sartre and then applies them to fucking everything. Right. She has a book called The Ethics of Ambiguity, which is about the ambiguity of being a subject and an object. And how this influences ethics. And it's a beautiful work, and she's fucking awesome. She was debating another philosopher named Simone Weil. Weil's very interesting. We won't get into that. But anyway, they're debating, and one of the things they're talking about is the revolution in China. And
the communist revolution?
Yes. And Beauvoir argues that, it's very important that they all get food and stuff, right? And that's something that the revolution needs to do. But it's also really important that the revolution provides meaning for all those people. Yeah. Beauvoir says all this, whatever. Weil eventually counters her, and she says, it's clear that you've never been hungry before. And that's... This sort of attack back is something that's very interesting, where I was thinking about, if we think about like cave people living like 10,000 BC or whatever, were they assured of the meaning of life? They had more important things to do, like live. Yeah. So that raises the question.
But I feel like that we can have desires or intuitions that come out once more basic needs are fulfilled. I think that's very possible. And
so like Maslow's hierarchy?
Yeah, I guess so. Because obviously, like, if I can't breathe, I'm not going to be pontificating about what is the meaning of life. I'm going to be trying to get air. Same thing with food. If my food is insecure, this is why throughout all of history, we don't see many philosophers or great intellectuals come out of the peasantry, because they're just trying to survive. While a lot of the thinkers of the time were noblemen who had the resources and the time and the security in order to actually engage in these endeavors. So I think I like the critique, but I don't, because it is very important to mention, and this is another reason why I do not like Marxists at all. But that's because it is very important to acknowledge the material circumstances of a person, but also at the same time you need to fulfill that kind of meaning. Because as soon as you fulfill that material circumstances, if you don't fill that meaning, they're going to fill the meaning with something else, and that something else might be completely contradictory to what you use to fill that meaning, or the field of food security, and they might think a way around that and try to enact that. So I think it has to be a multi-pronged attack if you want to build a stable society.
Yeah, that's really interesting. One of the ideas there, then, it makes me think about the idealists or the anti-materialists as a whole. That Vale's attack could be interpreted as an attack on all anti-materials, we'll say.
Right.
That it's like, well, no, you have to believe in nature to some degree. Yeah. Because you're a person, like you have to, you're an object still, you have to eat.
But I think, my big problem with the materialism is that they point out the most basic step.
Yep.
But they just don't. You have to continue on because our morals and things like that. Religion came from a reason. You have to acknowledge that part. It's not like that. These are all socially manufactured, especially at the beginning. Yeah. Right. I mean, they were, but it's not for like the power reasons that most materialists would say. They weren't manufactured from the beginning, and that these same forces are going to creep up again. So, they get the first point down to where we need to take care of people materialistically, but also, and I'd say the spiritual might be even more important, because you could probably, borrowing a little bit from Marx himself, which is ironic, because I'm using this to shit on Marx, but if you could probably keep a moral and ideological system alive that tells people it's good to starve, and they will starve to a certain extent. Obviously, there will reach a breaking point, but you can get a lot further doing that than just supplying them materially and saying, oh, you don't need to worry about any ethics or any morals or stuff like that. Or you propose morals or ethics that are opposite of theirs. They're much more likely to break from that. I'd have to go back and think about my position, because I'm kind of contradicting myself when I said that it's all socially constructed, but I think this makes sense even if it is socially constructed. To where, and it could be that starting off we needed to socially construct these things to form a coherent worldview and society, but as science has advanced, we don't need it anymore, which I think is probably dipping a little bit into probably what Nietzsche said. Yeah. Would be my guess. I don't know. I've never read it. But
let's talk a little bit more about Nietzsche here, too. This is really interesting. So he notices this whole death of God bit. And he's like, well, the Bible isn't going to work anymore. And he says, don't worry, guys. Hold my beer. I'll just fix it. I will be the new Bible.
Okay. Nice.
So he writes, for the first time he does this twice. First, he writes a book called Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And this does three things. It's supposed to be a critique of all religion. It's supposed to be a satire of all religion. And finally, though, it's supposed to replace the philosophical foundation of society with his new religion-ish thing. And it's fucking awesome. Anyone who is in the ages of 19 to 24 should absolutely pick up a copy of Thus Spoke Zarathustra.
Start praying 5 times a day.
But then he does it a second time later on in his life. He writes a book called The Antichrist in reference to himself. He says, fuck ethics. All of that. Instead, we need anti-Christian morals. He says that Christianity, in another work called Genealogy of Morals, he says that Christianity puts forth this slave morality. The slave morality ultimately came from an enslaved people, the Jews. And it makes sense why then they believe in this. For example, Jesus believes the meek shall inherit the earth, right? Yeah. Nietzsche looks at that and he says, that's the stupidest shit I've ever heard. No, they're not going to inherit the earth. The strong will inherit the earth.
Right.
That's something that a slave would say. Another example where he has this is an eye for an eye and the world goes blind. Well, that's no, if you, or like turn the other cheek, for example, too. If I hit you on one cheek and you turn to me the other, that is something that a slave would do. And it's not something that a slave master would do. You hit a slave master on the cheek, he's gonna fucking shoot you. Like he's gonna fucking hit you back. So it's
Let's somehow get this back to skepticism. So at least tangentially related to class material.
Yeah. He's trying to then replace the... Oh, it's still recording, but we just can't see it.
Okay, I was checking the time.
Oh, okay.
We're out of here too, so...
he challenges all of ethics then. He goes through and he does this huge skeptical sort of upheaval in ethics. And he says it's all bullshit, and instead he introduces this idea too. We need, instead ethics is simply something that holds back these great men. The Ubermensch, right?
Okay.
This is...
Let's calm down.
There's a line that he wrote too. This is, I think it's in Beyond Good and Evil. It says, I will never forgive Christianity for what it did to Blaise Pascal. Blaise Pascal was this great thinker, he's this mathematician, whatever. And he says, fuck you, Christianity, fuck you, ethics, for holding this great man back.
Right.
You took the mind of Pascal and turned it against himself, and he spent his entire life thinking about Christianity instead of something worth thinking about in Nietzsche's view.
You'd probably say the same for like Galileo or Newton.
Yeah, Galileo is actually a really good example because right away in the beginning of Myth of Sisyphus, Camus talks about Galileo real quick. He says that Galileo, who held a scientific truth of great importance, abjured it with the greatest ease as soon as it endangered his life. The larger argument he's making here is that the basis of all philosophy has to come out of thinking about suicide. He says that this is where all of our philosophy has to start. If you start anywhere else, we're at ridiculous things too far out. At first we have to figure out a reason why we're doing this in the first place.
Right, yeah.
Notably, by the way, Myth of Sisyphus then is an essay, or it's technically like 12 essays, whatever. It's a bunch of essays ultimately arguing why we shouldn't kill ourselves.
I appreciate it. Next one, Cameron.
So he spends the entire book arguing that. This entire book is dedicated to why you shouldn't kill yourself. He then writes another book called The Rebel, or The Man in Revolt, The Revolting Man, whatever it translates to in French, the Revolt. And that entire book is dedicated to why we shouldn't kill others, why we shouldn't murder. And the reason why he has to write 2 fucking books on these 2 very simple points is because he's arguing it from this skeptical framework. He has to generate this huge groundwork then, in order to be able to say anything about ethics. And then when he talks about revolt too, he ends up sort of concluding this human nature. Which is something that I'm very uncomfortable with. Like, I love all of his work.
I think that's a perfect example of why religion has such an advantage over skepticism. Is because a lot of the framework has, for one, already been built, and for two, it relies on a whole bunch of moral intuitions that people can make, where skeptics just go, well, I'm not going to believe in that, right?
Especially socialized intuitions too, right? Yeah, no, it's all good. You can.
I just like fidgeting.
Yeah,
but
it's all good.
Where skeptics need to build up this entire worldview, and it's a very intellectual, anti-intuitive thing. Yeah. Where it'd be extremely challenging to try, even if you can live as a skeptic, to try and implement that on a society-wide basis. Which, assuming you you're not a more extreme skeptic, you would probably want to do. You probably want to spread your worldview.
Oh no.
Yeah. Not any form of skepticism.
What's that?
Not any form of skepticism would want to do that?
No. There's... I feel like, again, it wouldn't be able to say. You can't say anything if you're going to take a radical approach. But for spreading it, I feel like, well, with Nietzsche, he writes all of his work not for everyone. He writes his book for the few sort of great men that he's getting at here. It's worth noting too. Incredibly sort of sexist, racist way of thinking about it. But he says,
I don't like great man theory of history.
Yeah, exactly. And he says, and he knows all of that too, and he says, I don't give a shit. I am simply better than you. Go fuck yourself.
Okay.
That's something that I don't think I've done that. But it's, as for proliferating any skepticism, I feel like that's something that, well, I'm thinking about, like, Nietzsche doesn't want followers. Foucault doesn't want followers. Other postmodernists, too, don't want followers. There's this famous story, too. Well, actually, there's that Doc Matthews guy I talked to you about before class. He was in Florida, and Derrida came to speak, whatever. And he was like, well, I'm not going. I'm going to go to the bar. And so he went to the bar, whatever. And suddenly all his classmates, whatever, that were going to go listen to Derrida speak, suddenly came flooding into the bar. And he's like, what happened, whatever. And they were like, well, Derrida didn't want to talk to us because none of us had an original thought. All of us just liked what he did. And Derrida too sort of goes against it. So he says, I'm not looking for followers.
Right.
And I think all skeptics sort of end up falling into that camp, especially more than any dogma. And skeptics would look at all other philosophical positions as dogmas then.
I just feel, I feel like that's a really good point for my societal constructed view, where religion kind of takes up the exact opposite position, right? Where you're encouraged to go spread the word. And I feel like a lot of people, especially religious people, feel the urge to go and spread the word. Even if we're not talking about religion, I feel like that's something, if you figure out something that's good or something that's more moral than what you're currently doing, you feel like a drive to spread that to the rest of, like, your family, your friends, or things like that. So either it's something socially constructed, or if it is something intrinsic, that's another really big difficulty with living as a skeptic. Because if you just shake off followers or wanting to spread your ideas to anyone else, or like spread the word of what you believe is good and right, or not even good or right, what is truthful, then that would be another internal confliction. That would make it even harder to live as a skeptic. But I feel like I have the feeling that the example you just gave, that guy, Dharmu, you said his name was?
Derrida.
Derrida, he doesn't have that feeling, and he's completely eliminated it. And if he has managed to do that and he doesn't have an inkling of it, it proves that you could probably intellectualize your way out of doing that. It's not something baked into humans. This was good. I feel like a last topic we can kind of touch on, we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, is skepticism and science. How compatible do you think those two are?
That's a really good question.
Because certain levels of skepticism, you just be like, I don't care, it doesn't mean anything. But less extreme versions of skepticism is the same drive to be there. I know Ben Shapiro has brought up that, like, the especially the Enlightenment, but Newton and Galileo, even though the scientific the Christian community went against him, the reason that they went out looking is for like a religious drive to understand God.
Yeah, this is something that I touched on with Nietzsche too, that Nietzsche sees God as being essential to science.
Right, yeah.
Or maybe he does, whatever. There's a caveat on all of this because, oh my god, fucking Nietzsche. So, yeah, let's start with the Russian nihilists. So when nihilism first became popular, nihilism, I'm going to say, is a form of skepticism.
Seems fair.
Yeah, kind of, but then there's these fucking Russians.
They always mess it up.
So where we get the idea of a nihilist actually comes from a book called Fathers and Sons by some Russian author. There's this guy in the book named Bazarov, and Bazarov is he's a nihilist. He identifies himself as a nihilist, and he says, I believe in nothing, whatever, yada yada. But he's notably very, very scientific. He spends his entire life doing science experiments, whatever. In fact, he is, at the, spoiler, I guess, it's been out for 150 years, so it doesn't matter. At the end of the book, he's cutting open this cadaver or something. And there's this disease that was inside the cadaver, and he ends up, getting on his deathbed because of this. He also finds it very difficult to be a nihilist, though, because he falls madly in love with someone, and he's like, well, I don't believe in such silly values as love, but now the world is beautiful to me. What the fuck? And he's like, Nietzsche's way out of nihilism, too, is by saying, well, no, and how we can get out of it is through, like, art or something like that, is this aesthetic realization, understanding of the world. The Bazarov seemingly to some degree still believes in knowledge. And maybe then it raises this question of, is he just a nihilist, not in a philosophical sense, but rather not in a general philosophical sense, but more of a political sense? Like he talks about how he believes we have to get... how he believes the nihilist movement has to burn down everything, so that way the next generation can come in and build
that would make sense in the context of like 1800s.
Yeah, exactly. The nihilists end up killing the Tsar. With the anarchists too. This is a whole fucking thing. Yeah.
I thought that was part of the Bolsheviks killed.
Oh no, yeah. That was a separate. The Tsar was killed multiple times.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. There's other Tsars.
Different dead Tsars.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's Bakunin to talk about there too. So there's that view. Let's put that out there. With local skepticism too, if you're a skeptic about ethics, you can still believe in science. You can argue that Popper's view ends up leading someone to skepticism. Even he believes in like trying to do falsifiable stuff, but he acknowledges the problem of induction. This is something that Hume talks about as well. Ultimately, any conversation that we have about science or scientific knowledge is going to just come back to the issue of the problem of induction. This is that, well, things have happened like this before. I think that they'll happen like this again. Over the course of a lifetime, it seems like this is a fair conclusion to make. But it's one that is philosophically unjustified, one that I don't think Camus ever calls it this. Ooh, Camus talks about science, actually. Let's talk about this. He says that... Let's see if I can find it. Here it is. I'm so smart. I found it so quickly. Wow. Okay. No, I'm kidding. He says... So he's talking about science, and it says... and you give me the choice between a description that is sure, but that teaches me nothing, Okay, so this is, for example, I know that this billiard ball moved exactly this distance, whatever, and he's like staying, like being very ground to earth, right? So you give me a choice between a description that is sure, and I'm sure about this billiard ball and all that.
Right, yeah.
But teaches me nothing, and hypotheses that claim to teach me, but you are not sure of. So then the other point then, so will be, let's use, I'm not, this is going to be philosophically anti-science, I don't believe the earth is flat, or I'm a creationist or whatever. When you look at something like the natural theory of evolution, natural selection, the theory of natural selection, there we go. This is something, or Einstein's relativity as well. It's still so silly to me. There's headlines every other week of Einstein's theory still confirmed.
Really?
Yeah. It's like, I remember when the black hole thing happened. It's like,
still there.
Good. Yeah, it's like, it's still working well. And it's like, this is always how it's approached, though. There's no one is willing to say in the scientific community, oh yeah, 100%, that's how it works. It's good.
Well, I think with quantum mechanics, it really throws a wrench in it. No,
yeah, exactly.
We're not doing a scientific.
But with Einstein, yeah, exactly. It's, you give me a choice between descriptions that you're sure of. So these are the actual experiments then.
Yeah.
For example, when the eclipse happened and we saw the star behind it, we are sure that that star is there, and we're sure of this, and we're sure of this description. Einstein then saying, yeah, this is because of this larger framework, is something that we're not sure of. And it's something that Camus is notably very pissed off about. He says then, he follows it up with this. He says, a stranger to myself and to the world, armed solely with a thought that negates itself as soon as it asserts, what is this condition in which I can have peace only by refusing to know and to live, in which the appetite for conquest bumps into the walls that defy its assaults? To will is to stir up paradoxes. Everything is ordered in such a way as to bring into being that poisoned peace produced by thoughtlessness, lack of heart, or fatal renunciations.
Jeez.
He writes always like this. It's fucking awesome. I love it. Nietzsche talks about this too. Nietzsche says that you're supposed to write as one lives. And so Nietzsche then writes in aphorisms, which are short, snappy, and quick. Because he believes that lives should be short, snappy, and quick. But yeah.
That was a mess. But yeah, I guess a final point that I have before you have to wrap it up is would you say, so you think skepticism could be widely considered anti-science or pro-science? Because you brought that up with Nietzsche. Because obviously
global skepticism is anti-science. With local skepticism, you can pick and choose. You can be ethically anti-science, or you can you can be an ethical skeptic and not believe science is wrong or anything like that. Right. It's worth noting too, this whole episteme idea that Foucault had, that's a great example of how we can keep doing science as skeptics. We just have to quietly acknowledge that everything might be bullshit. Right. And as long as that acknowledgement is made, which is like something that science inherently does, then it's sort of fine. So
that kind of, it brings a question to my mind. So in a roundabout way, do you think if we established a society that's skeptic, that's filled with skeptics, it would be not extreme skepticism, but it would be more, I wouldn't say morally just, but more morally coherent than a place filled with non-skeptics. Because what I'm thinking of is that my problem started with, like, if you had a society full of skeptics that aren't as scientifically interested as a society full of religious people, and they're more scientifically inclined because of their religion, that we will get a century of humiliation situation where these people become way more technologically advanced, and then they can just exploit this society and be destroyed. Obviously, that assumes that we want it to continue, kind of goes against skepticism, but whatever. But the other thing I was thinking of, say that they're both technologically as advanced. Say these skeptics believe in something like animal rights, and they believe in it very sincerely. If these two countries go to war, we have a situation like World War II where they're very evenly armed, at least for the most part at the beginning, and this society is willing to break their ethical system and do, hypothetically, the only way to get the wonder weapon that's going to win the war is do animal testing. And this society will be more likely to break that ethical norm than this society, which I don't know if skeptical people will be more likely to hold fast to their morals or not, especially if applied in society wide. I don't know, it's an unanswerable question, but it's an idea that came to my head. So just if you have any ideas to bounce off of it.
Yeah. To start, let's talk about skeptical societies in general. First of all, it seems to me, and this seems... I'll justify it real quick. It seems that, any skeptic ends up resulting in a sort of anarchism. And this could be a bias on my view. However, I will hold to it steadfast. If you're a skeptic, if you're a skeptic about the authority of God, what does that say about the authority of a president? You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
So it seems like you're going to, if you're going to have a skeptical society, you're going to end up falling into anarchism. And that isn't a bad thing. I'm not saying that with malice or anything. I'm not saying, it's going to be chaos or something like that.
I wouldn't say that either.
Yeah. But we can look at, there's two examples that came to my mind here, especially with this first idea that you had where, if you have a skeptical society and non-skeptical, the non-skeptics are going to wipe out the skeptics.
Yeah.
That's something that we see in history a lot of times. I'm only going to talk about two cases. In Manchuria, there was a group of people that in the 1921, 1922 or something, that...
The Manchus?
It was Koreans.
Oh.
It was.
You're talking about Korea. Okay.
Yeah, it's weird. So there was a society of 1 million to 2 million people who were anarchists, and they just tried living their way, whatever. And it went well. However, then there was a joint invasion by the Koreans, Chinese, and Japanese.
Oh.
Everyone said this is a threat to our ways of life, and we have to destroy them. This is kind of common. To go back to an even older example, is the Diggers in the English Civil War. Basically, it was a group of people that said, you know what?
English Civil War, like the
1600s,
Yeah, the War of the Roses? Jeez.
Yeah, there's some people who were like, it was feudal still.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of people who ended up taking a bunch of this random lord's land and saying, no, we're going to live on this farm, we're going to just work the lands, and we're just going to just enjoy each other's company and just live in a manner that we see as just. The English fucking wiped them out. Brought an army in. And it feels like this is going to be something that continues to happen, not because the anarchists are inherently peaceful or anything, but we can talk about, for example, military. Military is fucking impossible.
Yeah.
Because it seemingly needs hierarchy.
And we could say, I know very little.
Like you can have guerrilla bands, I guess.
Yeah, there's very little I know about this, but I know it did happen. There was during the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s, there was groups of anarchists that sprung out. They lost to a very interesting. Someone would call him a monarchist. Someone would call him a fascist dictator by the name of Franco. Militaries are extremely complicated, especially in modern warfare. Extremely complicated, extremely hierarchical organizations that need to be maintained with discipline. And if you don't do that, just someone better is going to come around and wipe you out. This is the problem I really see with what communists say on like the stage, where it's like, oh, a communist country would work, but all the other capitalist countries would gang up and bully them.
Yeah.
Right? Where, like, if you can't make it on your own, like, I'm sorry, kid, but you're not going to last it long. If you need to have an entire world revolution and everyone adopting your ideology, or else the capitalist worlds are going to, like, choke you out, then, like, it's not a good ideology. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and this gets to sort of the second point I was thinking about too. First of all, Simone Weil fought in that Spanish Civil War. She
on the anarchist side, or on
yes, this is something that basically every intellectual at the time supported the anarchists, unless they were fucking like in Spain. But then Simone Weil's her entire life is sort of the story of her friends and family starting to like save her from putting herself in dangerous situations. Like, for example, she died of starvation and like hyperthermia because she knew that there was people that was hungry, so she didn't feel like she had the right to eat or something. It was extraordinarily bourgeois too. She came from a bourgeois background and stuff, so it's even more interesting because of that.
Yeah, that kind of just feeds into a broader narrative about skepticism being self-destructive.
Yeah.
Or
maybe.
If you want to go further than that, like just postmodernism or extreme leftism being self-destructive.
But yeah, let's get at this other point then that you brought up here too. I was thinking about this. It feels like if you have a society of skeptics, they're going to end up being anarchists, and they're probably going to be primitivists. This is going to be something like there's the Unabomber. He argued that we had to go back to the way of life before the Industrial Revolution. There's a lot of anarcho-primitivists who believe that we have to go back before the Agricultural Revolution. I believe that because I've talked about this, how the skeptics can't say anything, whatever idea, you might even need to regress to before the linguistic revolution.
Yeah.
We have like this abolition of language, and it's something that's hard to imagine as working well, especially in a society with other things like it's hard for them to coexist.
We talked about this during when we talked about it in class when we were discussing the podcast a couple weeks ago, that it seems very, very hard, if that were to even happen from like on a world stage, no hiccups or anything like that, for a yo-yo effect to start happening, where like one society is gonna, especially if you abolish language, one society is basically just gonna start our history again.
Yeah.
In the Stone Age or the Bronze Age or whatever age they decide to end up in, and then just start yo-yoing back and forth of like, societies get built up, power structures get built up, we get feudalism, we get communism or another form of ideology or economic system, and then it's another world revolution of anarcho primitivists. Or
I will say that Camus would then, if he heard that, I feel like he would argue immediately that it is better to keep yo-yoing.
That was the point I brought up in class, where it's like you could say that's better, but I would disagree with how many people just die.
Yeah, and that's something
getting there. And when you're that technologically primitive, like any genetic disability, dead. You're leaved on the side of the road. I guess that phrase wouldn't work anymore. You're dead. Diabetes, dead. Any sort of like cataracts, the simplest thing, you're probably dead if that's going to happen. And just so many people would die if we keep yo-yoing. It seems like so much more of a practical solution to just figure out how to implement, no matter how flawed it is, try to implement something better as we are right now.
Yeah.
If you're going to bring morals into it. If you say, I don't care about morals, this is just the way I want to do it, then like, fine, I guess I can't argue with you. But if you're going to bring up it'd be better, then how would you say it'd be better without quantifying it in human lives?
Yeah. It'd be how Camus does it. And that's of experience. This is something too you can look at. There's a couple of historians that talk a lot about this. The standard of living in England in 1750 versus 1850 seems like it actually, there's an argument to be made that the standard of living decreases. Especially for, let's talk about like the common worker, like kids working in mines type of thing versus before when you had the enclosure movement.
I feel like that argument would be way better in like the 1800s, but now that we're moving into the 21st century and our standard of living is skyrocketed, and especially now as we're talking about automation and possibly eventually, this is probably not even going to happen in the 21st century, it's probably going to be post this, but potentially transitioning into a post-work society where we can get automation to do everything for us. Like a lot of that argument seems to fall apart.
This was notably a debate in the hippie during the counterculture, during the hippie circles. Abby Hoffman argued for a society with full unemployment. Isn't that cute? And he was like, we believe that in a world with... He was arguing this in the 1960s. It's worth noting, too, with Camus. Camus died in, I think it was January 1st, might have been January 3rd or something. I think it was January 1st, though. January 1st of 1960. He didn't see any of the 60s, and that's a fucking tragedy. It would have been so interesting, so incredible if he would have lived longer to see something like Vietnam, especially. But anyway, Abby then advocates this view of let the machines do it. Thank you. The other argument to be made here, though, is that we already had a sort of post-work society. The amount of work that an Alaskan bushman does is simply less than the average American worker.
By a large margin, I would say. Actually, I don't
know. Well,
they have to scavenge for food.
Yeah, but the actual work that they end up doing is less still, though. This could be attributed, though, to like large game animal or something like that. But there's an argument to be made that we already had that post-work society.
There is, but I would then argue is that we could potentially have a post-work society with all the advantages.
that would be better. Yeah, and that's what Abby advocates.
You wouldn't have to die if you have diabetes, for example, or something like that. So I think we have 5 minutes left, so we're gonna have to leave. So one last thing then. Peter Gericluse wrote a paper arguing there's an anarchist solution to climate change. And basically what he advocates is not sort of going back to the old ways, but instead reviving some of the old ways. For example, bring back ice boxes. Just having public transportation, running that on biomass or something. There's a really good essay he wrote in 2008. I think it's called something like "The Anarchist Solution to Climate Change," and it just describes this like paradise, sort of this green anarchist utopia, and it's something that has had a decent impact on me, and it's something that's worth checking out. All right, well, if you want to wrap up the part 2 of the podcast, if you listen this long, thank you, I guess, for another 48 minutes.
There we go. I'll post this on YouTube, too. That's what we'll do.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
That'll be good for it. Whatever.
Email and YouTube, that's all you need.
Yep, there we go.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening if you did.
Since I'm going to post it on YouTube, I have a 2-hour lecture already on just the myth of Sisyphus. If you want to listen to that, you can find that on my YouTube channel then, I guess.
Yeah.
That's like the only other video I think that's currently up.
Okay.
But yeah, there we go.
Gems.
Have a wonderful day.
Yeah.